This is a 2003 Dodge Durango. This is the final year for this body style, the first generation Durango. And Dodge was seriously late to the SUV party when this thing first came out in 1997. In fact, the Ford Explorer, they came out in 1990, but before that they had the Bronco too. And then Toyota had the 4Runner starting in 84 or so. And then the Chevy S10 Blazer was a year prior to that. So Dodge had plenty of time to make sure this thing was a home run when it first came out. And in some ways they did a pretty good job, in others, not so much. This, however, is my latest auction buy. I picked this up at the state surplus sale here in Delaware last week, and let me show you around a little bit. I love going to these surplus auctions and finding a really clean, really nice, good condition, and a good running car for not a lot of money. And this thing fits that to a T. It's a 2003, it has 123,000 miles on it, it's four-wheel drive, it's a sport model, and it's got a lot of great features on there. There's hardly any body damage, hardly any rust on it whatsoever, and it is the buy of the auction. Now, when I was looking at this at the auction, the bidding was hovering around $900, and it was sticking there for a long time. Close to about an hour or so before the auction ended, bidding started creeping up. I had set up my max bid for $1,375, and I ended up winning this sweet mama for $1,355, just a little below my max. And frankly, for $1,355, I got a really nice looking, great running, attractive, I think, SUV. Look, this thing is almost 20 years old, right? And it has some blemishes. It's had like a little chip right here with some rust popping out. I've got some residue over here from a sticker. I got a little dent in a quarter over there. But if you can spend $1,355 and get a good running, good looking truck with a V8, with four-wheel drive, without rust, with cold air conditioning, well, to me, that's a home run. Let me pop the hood, I'll show you inside a little bit. So there's a bunch of different engine options with the Durango during its life cycle, starting with the 3.9 liter V6. There was also a 5.2 liter V8, which is a 318. There was a 4.7 liter V8 that replaced the 318. And then there's also a 360 V8, which is a 5.9 liter, and a 5.9 liter supercharged. This Durango has the 4.7 liter, 235 horsepower engine with a 4-speed automatic. And I got to tell you what, every one of these auction cars that I buy, I always end up with a little friend here hitching a ride home. Inside, it's really quite nice and pleasant. You have front bucket seats, of course. You have a center console that's actually surprisingly deep. A lot of cubbies and storage nooks all over the car. There's your four-wheel drive controller. It's on the fly, of course, for $97. You have the basic instrumentation panel. There was 2 different panels available in 2003. Your headlights, of course. Lots of air vents. A surprising number of air vents. Cruise control on the steering wheel. Over on the door, you have your power mirrors, of course. Power locks, windows, window lockout. It's actually very well optioned for a fleet vehicle. It's actually one of the surprises that I had since checking this out and bringing it home. In the center stack, we have a cassette player, of course, 1997, and your climate control dual zone for the front, which is interesting. On the passenger side, you have the passenger airbag. Below that is the glove compartment, and the Durango had 3 different trim levels. This is the sport model, again, which is surprising considering this was a fleet vehicle for DART First State, which is the mass transit system here. Out back, you have a 40-20-40 split bench in the back. Kind of cool. And you got this seat in lieu of a 3rd row. Look at this, lap belts in the middle row. Isn't that crazy? I'm really pleased with how clean, how nice, how well this thing turned out after a good detailing. Now the paint still needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but in terms of the interior, I am so pleased and so happy with how this thing turned out. I happen to really like the styling of this Durango, especially when it first came out in 1997. When I first saw this coming out of the factory, which is just maybe 20-30 minutes from here, the Newark assembly plant, I thought this thing was the coolest, toughest, baddest looking SUV out there. Nothing cute about it. Pure business, pure fun, pure adventure. And I couldn't wait to get a closer look at it. This version, and the same thing with the first one that I looked at back in 1997, man, it lets you down. And the letdown is inside. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Over on the door panels, you have 3 different colors of plastic going on here. Makes no sense. It's just cold, hard, exactly what you would expect, right? This was a Chrysler trademark, a hallmark of everything they seemed to make in the 90s. So what do you say we go for a drive? I'll tell you a little more about it and what I had to do with this since I got it home. thing is such a pleasant surprise. It drives so nice. The engine is smooth. It's not a lot of power at 235, but it's the torque, right? And it just makes it an effortless, seamless drive. The transmission's only a 4-speed, nothing special about it, but the shifts are liquid butter, man. You can't even tell. You don't even know what's happening with the transmission. The steering, I mean, it's flat. I mean, it's an SUV from the 90s, right? And with the solid front axle, it's a little choppy on the ride. It's exactly what you would expect from something from the 90s. It doesn't compete with today's SUVs, not at all. But there's something about this that is just simple, and it's easy, it's reliable, it's robust, and it just does everything it's supposed to do. The brakes are strong. It's a 4-wheel disc brake, something new for 2003 for the Durangos. It stops straight, it accelerates strong, it has a nice sound to the engine. I mean, everything about this is pleasant. The other day, my wife went up to church. She took this. This was the first car in the driveway. She ran up to church with this, and she came back without a single issue, without complaining, a fuss, or a complaint about it. It did everything well for her. She, in fact, drove it later that same day when she had another car that she could have taken. And in my head, my wife takes this and drives it without fussing, without complaining. You know, that's a pretty good sign to me. That's an indicator that it's a pretty nice vehicle that does everything well that it's supposed to do. Now, when I first looked at this at the auction lot, bidding was hovering around the $900 mark. And in my head, I had a max bid amount of, say, $1,200. That's about what I wanted to spend for this, given the unknowns about drivability and condition on the engine, transmission, brakes, and so forth. So I went in there and I put my max bid. The max I wanted to spend was $1,375. I ended up winning this at $1,355, so just a little under what I wanted to spend. Now, on the drive home, I realized it had some problems, right? It had a dead battery at the auction lot when I did my inspection, and I knew that. I was hoping the drive home would give it enough time to charge the battery, and it was about a 25-minute drive. And by the time I got home, parked in the driveway, hit the key, it was dead. So right away, I knew I needed the battery, and that's always expensive. I don't know what happened to battery prices over the past few years, but they've gone through the roof. They start at $100, it seems like. The battery for this, $120. It also needed lug nuts. There was 2 lug nuts missing on the driver's side. A few bucks for lug nuts. Needed wiper blades. I bought that as well. All told, total out of pocket for repairs that I had to make to this thing, $145. Nothing outrageous. And then there was a bunch of little knick-knack things, like the weather stripping needed to be glued back on the 2 side doors on the driver's side. The door panel needed to be reattached. It needed a thorough cleaning and scrubbing. Man, I spent the most time I've ever spent cleaning the interior of this thing. I pulled out not 1, not 2, but 5 jugs of nasty swamp water that I pulled out of the seats and the carpet. Oh, and when I was cleaning the exterior of this, I gave it a really good scrubbing. I found a small little number 9 on the back bumper, unit number 9. One of the viewers commented on the last video that they work for DART, and this was a fleet vehicle, and they were interested in finding out what the unit number was. So I also saw on the dash, there's this little hidden button down here, and there's a strobe controller under the back seat, and the thing has strobes front and rear, which is kind of cool. So even though the repairs were pretty simple and pretty straightforward in this, there was one issue with the brake lights that gave me some problems. And I had a brake light out on the passenger side, so I simply put a new bulb in, and it didn't fix it. And I didn't know if the bulb was good or not, so I swapped the bulbs from the left to the right, and it still didn't fix the problem. I ended up swapping the brake light housings from left to right, and that did fix the problem. So the passenger side did light up. I took a closer look at the brake light housing, and I saw one of the prongs, one of the pins on the brake light housing wasn't as flush as the other pin. So what I did on a whim, I took some solder and I built up that prong a little bit just to level it out with the other prong, and that seemed to do the trick. I've got brake lights that are working now. Turn signals work. I had to replace a bulb in the front right turn signal. And what's so surprising about that is that all the different types of fasteners that were used throughout this vehicle, right? To change the light bulb in the turn signal up front, there was a T10 screw, there was a T20 screw, and then there's a 10mm bolt all holding in that housing. It made no sense whatsoever why so much effort was put into fasteners. It's what they did. The problem is, I can't keep this. I've got so many cars. I don't even want to count the number of cars I have, but I know I have too many, and I don't need another SUV. Ironically, one of my viewers saw this at the auction lot, even before I went and did my inspection. He asked if I would go down there, take a look at it, give him my assessment of this, and my best guess on value. Now, I think this thing is worth $2,000, maybe $2,500 to the right price, $2,000 to sell it quickly. So I bought this with the sole intent of reselling, and reselling to the viewer that is interested in this. He expressed an interest even after I shared with him some of the problems and the condition and overall quality of this thing. He's interested, he's a buyer. I got to run to the DMV this week in order to get this title transferred into my name so I can resell it, with the expectation of selling it this weekend. And that's the plan with this, is just to have it for the next few days. Burn some more gas. It came with a full tank of gas, by the way, from the auction lot, and just move it out next weekend. So that's it. That's my Durango, man. I think it's a nice solid auction buy, and I think the next owner of this thing is really going to appreciate and enjoy this thing too, and I think it's going to be a real solid buy for them as well. So I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed spending time with me, and I will see you on the next video.